For centuries, his name struck terror into the hearts of empires. He commanded a nomadic horde that swept across continents, leaving only ruin in its wake. Rome itself, the mightiest power on earth, trembled before him. He was not just a conqueror, he was the Scourge of God. How did one man, born from the steppes, cultivate such an aura of absolute dread that entire nations surrendered before he even arrived? What was the true psychological anatomy of the leader who inspired a terror so profound, it changed the course of European history? Welcome to Anatomy of Dread. In this documentary, we will perform a psychological autopsy on Attila the Hun. We will dissect the brutal world that forged him, the chilling tactics he employed, and the true, devastating impact of his terror. By the end, you will understand the real dread of the greatest nomadic conqueror the world has ever known. Our story begins not in the halls of kings, but on the vast, unforgiving plains of the Eurasian steppe. This was the birthplace of the Huns, a nomadic people whose very existence was defined by movement, horsemanship, and a ruthless pragmatism necessary for survival. It was from this crucible that Attila would emerge. From a psychological perspective, the Hunnic way of life itself was an anatomy of dread for settled civilizations. They were an enigma, appearing seemingly from nowhere, striking with lightning speed, and disappearing just as quickly. They were master horsemen, living in the saddle, and their composite bows were weapons of unparalleled precision and lethality, capable of raining death upon a fleeing enemy. Attila was born around 406 AD, into a society where strength, courage, and loyalty to the tribe were paramount. His early life, though shrouded in mystery, would have immersed him in the harsh realities of nomadic life. Constant training, skirmishes with rival tribes, and an understanding that survival depended on aggressive expansion and the ability to instill fear. He would have learned that resources were won, not grown, and that a reputation for brutality was a powerful asset. The Roman Empire, already in decline, had long experienced the dread of these barbarian peoples. But the Huns were different. They were not just raiders, they were an organized, formidable force. Before Attila, the Huns had already established a powerful presence on the fringes of the Roman world, demanding tribute and sometimes even serving as mercenaries. This constant, encroaching pressure created a pervasive sense of anxiety and helplessness within the Roman Empire. This backdrop of perpetual conflict and the relentless drive of nomadic existence shaped Attila's leadership. He was a product of a culture where only the strongest survived, and where mercy was a luxury rarely afforded. His genius lay not just in his military tactics, but in his profound understanding of human psychology, how to exploit fear, how to break the will of his enemies before the battle even began. He inherited a growing Hunnic empire, but it was Attila who would truly transform it into an unstoppable force, a name that would strike terror from the Rhine to the Volga. The dread he would soon unleash upon Europe was not just military, it was an existential fear of a force so alien, so brutal, that it seemed to embody divine wrath. The Scourge of God was about to be unleashed. By 434 AD, Attila, alongside his brother Bleda, inherited control of the Hunnic Empire. But it was Attila who would ultimately unify the disparate, often warring Hunnic tribes and their subjugated peoples into a singular, terrifying force. His leadership transformed them from formidable raiders into an empire-shattering juggernaut. From a psychological perspective, Attila's genius lay in his ability to forge a vast multi-ethnic horde through a combination of charismatic leadership, ruthless efficiency, and a meticulously cultivated aura of absolute terror. He understood that loyalty could be won not just through victory, but through fear, fear of him, and fear of the consequences of disunity. His first move was often to eliminate rivals, including, controversially, his own brother Bleda. While accounts vary, many sources suggest Attila had Bleda murdered, removing any challenge to his sole authority. This act, whether true or not, sent a chilling message. Attila would tolerate no dissent, no shared power. This single-minded ruthlessness was foundational to his leadership. Attila's architecture of terror was built on several psychological pillars. Unrelenting brutality, he never shied away from extreme violence. Towns that resisted were utterly annihilated, their inhabitants massacred or enslaved. This created a reputation so fearsome that many cities would simply open their gates and surrender at the mere news of his approach, hoping to avert a worse fate. Strategic unpredictability, he moved with astonishing speed, and often struck where least expected. This kept his enemies constantly guessing, fostering paranoia and preventing effective countersprints. Apparent invincibility, his string of unbroken victories created a psychological belief among both his followers and his enemies that he was destined to conquer, perhaps even divinely favored, earning him the terrifying moniker the Scourge of God. He maintained a surprisingly austere personal lifestyle for a conqueror of his stature, eating simply while his generals feasted. This projected an image of a leader solely focused on conquest, devoid of personal indulgence, making him seem even more formidable and relentless. By the mid-5th century, Attila commanded an empire stretching from Central Asia to modern-day Germany. He ruled over Huns, Goths, Alans, and other Germanic tribes, all held together by his iron will and the terror he inspired. His capital, a massive wooden encampment in modern-day Hungary, became a hub of power, tribute, and fear, a place where envoys from the mighty Roman empires came to beg and negotiate. This unification was not born of love or shared ideology, but of overwhelming power and the profound dread that Attila embodied. He had proven that terror, when wielded with strategic genius, could be the most potent force for conquest and empire building, turning a collection of diverse peoples into the greatest existential threat the Roman world had ever faced. With his empire unified and his reputation for brutality cemented, Attila turned his gaze directly upon the Roman Empire. Not just one, but two Roman empires, the Eastern, Byzantine, and the Western, would experience the full devastating force of the Scourge of God. From a psychological perspective, Attila's invasions were masterclasses in psychological warfare on an unprecedented scale. He didn't just aim to conquer territory, he aimed to break the spirit of entire civilizations. The dread he inspired often preceded his arrival, causing widespread panic and mass evacuations. His campaigns began with devastating raids into the Eastern Roman Empire's Balkan provinces. City after city fell, obliterated with such ferocity that many were simply abandoned and never rebuilt. Attila demanded exorbitant tribute, not just gold, but the surrender of Roman territory and even Roman citizens for his own use. The Eastern Emperor Theodosius II, despite his vast wealth, was reduced to a state of desperate appeasement, effectively paying Attila to leave his capital, Constantinople, untouched. This humiliation sent a chilling message across the Roman world. Even the mighty empire could be brought to its knees by the Huns. But Attila's most famous and audacious campaign came in for 51 AD when he turned his horde westward, setting his sights on Gaul, modern-day France. His stated intention was to liberate an Ostrogothic princess, but his true aim was likely the rich Western Roman provinces and a decisive blow against their power. The dread that preceded him was immense. As his vast army swept through Gaul, cities like Metz were utterly destroyed, their populations massacred. The survivors fled in terror, creating a humanitarian crisis that further destabilized the region. Attila systematically used terror as a weapon, ensuring that news of his brutality would spread, weakening resistance before his arrival. This compelled the last great Roman general, Aetius, to form an unlikely alliance with the Visigothic king Theodoric I, uniting their forces to confront the common enemy. The resulting Battle of the Catalonian Plains was one of the largest and bloodiest battles in ancient history, a desperate stand against the seemingly unstoppable Hunnic tide. Both sides suffered horrific casualties, and while Attila's advance into Gaul was checked, it was far from a decisive defeat for the Huns. The psychological impact of these invasions was profound. For the Romans, Attila was not just another barbarian king, he was a force of divine retribution, a symbol of the end times. The very fabric of their world seemed to be unraveling under his relentless onslaught. The dread he inflicted was not just of death, but of utter annihilation, a terror that would forever mark the twilight years of the Western Roman Empire. Despite the heavy losses at the Catalonian Plains, Attila was far from defeated. In 452 AD he launched his final, audacious campaign, an invasion of Italy itself, the heartland of the Western Roman Empire. Cities like Aquila were utterly razed, their populations fleeing in terror, seeking refuge in the lagoons that would eventually become Venice. From a psychological perspective, this invasion pushed Rome to the brink of collapse. The dread was absolute. The Emperor Valentinian III and his court fled, leaving the capital seemingly defenseless. It was a testament to Attila's terrifying reputation that the greatest imperial city of the West lay vulnerable before him. Yet, in a moment shrouded in historical mystery, Attila halted his advance on Rome. According to legend, Pope Leo I, accompanied by two high-ranking officials, met Attila outside the city. What transpired between them is debated, but the outcome was undeniable. Attila agreed to withdraw from Italy. Historians offer various theories for this momentous decision, ranging from disease. A devastating plague could have been ravaging Attila's forces, Logistics. His army was stretched thin, suffering from lack of supplies, and weary from years of campaigning. Divine intervention. The legend of Pope Leo's persuasion became a powerful narrative, adding to Attila's own mystic aura as someone who could be swayed by spiritual power. Political calculation. Perhaps he saw greater strategic value in preserving Rome to demand future tribute, or he was wary of replicating the fate of Alaric, who died shortly after sacking Rome. Whatever the reason, Rome was spared, an event that only amplified Attila's mystique as a force so potent that even divine intercession was required to stop him. But the Scourge of God would not terrorize Europe for much longer. In 453 AD, a year after his Italian campaign, Attila died suddenly. The exact cause is debated: a burst blood vessel during a wedding feast, possibly a drunken stupor, or perhaps even assassination by his new bride. Just as mysteriously as he had appeared, Attila vanished from the world stage. His death marked the immediate collapse of his vast, dread-fueled empire. Without his singular, terrifying will, the diverse Hunnic tribes and their subjugated peoples quickly fragmented and dispersed. The dread he had so meticulously cultivated was a personal force, not an institutional one. The legacy of Attila the Hun is one of profound, lingering terror. For centuries, his name was invoked to describe any devastating, unstoppable force. He was more than a conqueror. He was a symbol of chaos, destruction, and a brutal reckoning. The Anatomy of Dread reveals that while his empire was fleeting, the psychological impact of his reign of terror, the memory of the Scourge of God, would echo through the history of Europe for generations. A chilling reminder of humanity's vulnerability to absolute, unyielding power. And so, the true, brutal story of Attila the Hun, the Scourge of God, is laid bare. We have journeyed through his origins on the unforgiving steppe, witnessed the ruthless forging of his empire, seen the dread he inflicted upon Rome, and explored the mysterious end to his reign of terror. He was a force that shook the very foundations of the ancient world. So why does the dread of Attila the Hun continue to captivate and even terrify us today? From a psychological perspective, Attila's story resonates with a primal human fear, the fear of absolute, unyielding, and seemingly unstoppable destruction. He was not a monster in the supernatural sense, but a human being who perfected the art of psychological warfare and strategic brutality. The real dread lies in knowing that such a force can emerge from human ambition and circumstance. The Anatomy of Dread compels us to understand the allure of such figures. Attila embodied the ultimate destructive power, a leader who could bend entire peoples to his will and bring empires to their knees. His legend isn't just about military might, it's about the profound psychological impact he had on his world. He proved that terror, when systematically applied, could be a more potent weapon than any sword or arrow. His impact was so profound that his name became synonymous with chaos and destruction, surviving for centuries. Even after his death and the swift collapse of his empire, the memory of the dread he instilled continued to shape European identity and history. He became the ultimate other, the barbarian against whom civilized Europe defined itself. The enduring power of Attila's story lies in its timeless lessons. The fragility of civilization. He showed how quickly established orders and mighty empires could crumble under the onslaught of a determined, ruthless force. The power of fear. He demonstrated how a reputation for extreme brutality could be weaponized, leading to capitulation before even a battle began. The charisma of the conqueror. Despite his terror, he possessed a charisma that allowed him to unite diverse peoples under his banner, even if through fear. And this is the final chilling lesson from our investigation. The story of Attila the Hun teaches us that some historical figures are so immensely powerful, so adept at wielding dread, that their legacy transcends their fleeting empire. They become archetypes of destruction, haunting our collective consciousness as reminders of humanity's capacity for both unimaginable conquest and the profound, enduring terror it can inflict. The Anatomy of Dread reveals that sometimes, the greatest monsters are those who embody the raw, untamed force of history itself. And so, the final investigation is now passed to you. After dissecting the man, the empire, and the terror, what do you believe is the most enduring psychological lesson humanity can take from Attila the Hun, the Scourge of God? Leave your analysis in the comments below. Let's continue the discussion about this monumental figure and the enduring power of his dreadful legacy.